Purposely. Your life, God's purpose. Listen at onpurposely.com.
You're listening to the AllMomDoes podcast. I'm Julie Lyles Carr, and we are in a series on seasons of life. And as my producer Rebecca and I were putting this together, I knew there was someone that I absolutely had to have on. I've wanted to have her on before. We just haven't gotten the timing to work out. But this is someone who has delved into a season that I think a lot of us think should be very instinctual, and yet it often isn't. I cannot wait for you to meet my friend, my amazingly smart, witty, cool friend, Leslie Bley. Leslie, thanks so much for being on the show today.
Well, I'm so excited to be here. Thank you. It's going to be fun.
You are the best. It's going to be so fun.
Mm-hmm.
I love how we met because you reached out to me via email. I can't even remember how you might have heard of me. And you said, hey, I've recently moved to the area and I want to get to know people. Would you meet me for coffee? I was like, I already like this chick. This is like so just okay. And we met at Starbucks. I had to bring my twins with me, which was, of course, chaos. But you have twins, so that was very helpful.
Yep.
And we sat down and I just fell in love. What inspired you to reach out in that way? Yeah, absolutely.
I know you say it like it sounds easy, and I'm sure I was just desperate and shaky and overwhelmed in a new place. And I think what I did was I looked at churches locally to see if I could find women's ministry leaders, like someone who may be like-minded and may just be encouraging, because I think I was in that place of feeling so new. So I would shake and make a phone call like, oh, maybe this person will take time. And, you don't expect to be called back, honestly. There's so many churches here and they're all big and here in Austin, but you called back and it was just so meaningful that you would respond. And then we had a great first meet. It was wonderful. So, and here we are 6 years later. It was 6 years ago.
Years later.
Crazy.
And you were so incredible to come in that season where I was pastoring and you just ministered to my women so beautifully, and you're just the best. And part of what is so awesome about you is I tend to surround myself with friends who are therapists. I'd like to think it was because of the work I was involved in for so long. But honestly, now, Leslie, I'm like, no, I think that therapists are probably the only people who can handle friendship.
Stop it. It probably just means you're very wise, right?
Oh,
you're very transparent and wise.
Something like that.
That's
I know.
Yes.
So, Leslie, you've done some incredible work in the professional counseling space. So tell listeners a little bit about yourself and your work and how you got into the profession that you're in.
Yes. Well, I have been counseling as a licensed professional counselor for about 18 years, 6 of those here in Austin. Before that, I was in St. Louis, Missouri for a long time. And married to Kevin. He's a carpenter. And I've got twin 11-year-old, almost 12-year-old boys that we call Sons of Thunder. They are not quiet beings, very, very active kiddos. And, in my, for fun, I look for time alone. So that's what I do for fun, is I try to find some time by myself in the quiet. And some of the things I do in therapy are working with women, working with moms, working with couples, in particular the motherhood space as it relates to women in their own identities, in their own story work, in their own emotional mapping. For whatever reason, for many of us, motherhood is what puts a lot of our emotionality on the map in a way that kind of gets our attention and can be a struggle to notice while you're parenting and just doing life. And maybe you work also. And so I have a lot of empathy, and I'm kind of drawn to women who are just kind of discovering who they are during that season. Because I think a lot of identity questions and a lot of just who we are seems to come up during especially the first few years of motherhood, when you literally have been kind of in the washing machine and then in the dryer. I mean, you're tumbling through, so for some of us are, and I have really enjoyed, the privilege of being involved in some women's stories through that time and that chapter of life.
In talking about seasons, this series that we've been in, I have to say that motherhood is the one that I feel like we can be very assumptive as a culture, as women, that motherhood is just something we're going to walk into. And yes, there's going to be some sleepless nights, and there might be the episiotomy you weren't planning on, and there may be some of these unknown factors that come along. But at its core, motherhood is the most natural, instinctual, primal thing that we can do.
Mm.
And to be frank, Leslie, for me, it really was. I mean, I was just one of those that first baby came along and I was like, I get it. I had the gear. And I don't say that in any kind of ta-da. I say that from a place of it not even registering with me the challenge that a lot of women can have finding this gear. So if you're a listener who's like, motherhood just felt like the most natural thing I ever did. Great. That was a gift.
Absolutely. It's a gift.
It's a gift.
Take it. Receive it.
That's right. Receive it, enjoy it, but don't think it's anything that you did, because I've known amazing women, far more organized, far more on top of things than I am, who, when it gets real at a girl's dinner, are like, man, this motherhood thing, I don't know that I'm really built for it. What have you found in your practice? Because this is something that I found fascinating about the work that you're doing, is this identification that you've had of women for whom motherhood is not coming easily. When did this first start registering with you? Like, hey, wait a minute, we may be making a lot of assumptions about women and their journeys into motherhood.
Yeah. I mean, like a lot of things, it started with my own story. Having the twins as my first experience. So going right in from 0 to 2,
Right.
And being a little older, I was 36. I'd had all these years to anticipate, prepare, imagine what I would be like, especially as a Christian mom. And then not seeing that naturally occur. It was so distressing. And to be introduced to categories like postpartum anxiety or postpartum depression, or children who are neurodivergent and aren't neurotypical. Just these categories I didn't anticipate, didn't expect, and they were being used in my care. And so I think it started with me just feeling like, whoa, this is really different. And am I allowed to tell somebody that I love my boys, but I don't like motherhood? Is that something you can say? Are you allowed to say it at church? I mean, it was a lot of my own just navigating that, feeling very alone in that navigation space, and hoping that no mom ever walk that alone again, right? I don't think any mom should be alone in any of her experiences of motherhood, whether they are easy and natural and wonderful, or you're on the struggle bus. I don't think you should be alone.
Right, right.
And I kind of vowed at that point to really try to not, if I came across a mom who was struggling, that she shouldn't struggle alone.
Right. I can remember the sense in the room when I would have you come guest speak for the mothers group that we had weekly when I was on staff at a local church. And you would come and you would just give permission for women in the room to say, do you love your kids, but not like motherhood? First of all, the number of hands that would go up was remarkable. The look of confusion on those who didn't raise their hands was interesting. I was like,
yes.
Oh, okay. So
That's
this is
a
an area
thing.
where women haven't connected the dots on this, myself included. Okay. And then the relief that I could feel come across the room as you began to say, it's okay. This isn't always the most primal, instinctual thing. And there are things we can talk about and ways that we can create tools to be able to navigate these seasons. I could just feel that relief. Have you found that women have been ashamed or afraid to be able to say out loud, okay, love my kids, but man, some of the rest of this gig, I'm not sure about this?
Yeah, I mean, I think I hope at this point it's gotten a little bit less taboo. I feel like women have across the board been writing more about their experience, been talking more about it. You obviously have made safe places for it to be talked about in your spheres. So I hope that the light is coming in, on the dark areas. But I think we all, at a deep level, identity wise, we want to be good moms. We want to be seen as good moms. We want to feel at our core that were good. And I think when we talk about the hard things, especially if we talk about it in a place that doesn't feel safe from judgment, I think it's vulnerable. I think that perception of am I a good mom starts to feel more fragile when we talk about the hard stuff. And so I think that's why there's been gates around it or shut doors or, we've hesitated to talk about it. And I do hear people like joke about it as though that's kind of the only way to get to it is kind of make a joke. And I'm always listening to what's underneath that. Are you getting support? We can laugh about it, but we also want to pay attention to it.
Right.
Know.
What are the things you listen for? And not that if you run into Leslie at the grocery store, she's completely psychoanalyzing you. I'm not saying that.
No. I'm too tired. Yeah.
You're off the clock at that point. But what are some of the indicators that you find if a woman comes in and she says, Leslie, I don't know, I'm just feeling unsettled, or I'm exhausted, or whatever the thing is. What are some of the markers you're looking for? Because there may be a listener out there going, well, I don't know that I would say I don't like being a mom, but I know that I'm not beaming and glowing like some of the people around me. So what are you listening for when a woman comes in, and what helps you identify if maybe there's this nascent sense of, I don't know if I like this thing. Yeah.
I think I'm listening to, this is going to sound silly because I'm not a doctor, so I say this with tongue in cheek, but I'm listening to their nervous system. Mm-hmm. So the two words I hear the most are overwhelmed and exhausted. And those are two different parts of the nervous system, right? Overwhelmed is associated with hyperarousal, anxiety symptoms, lots of brain, lots of flight of ideas, not sleeping very much, lots of worry, lots of anticipating problems, lots of not feeling any breathing, not feeling any calm, not being able to kind of rest your mind, right? So overwhelmed is like, your brain and nervous system is on overdrive, and I'm listening for that in that column of emotions, like overwhelmed. But then I also hear exhausted. Well, that's the other side of the nervous system. That's hypo arousal. That's, I can't sleep enough. I want to sleep all the time. I'm not moving. I'm not able to get my brain to come online. I can't remember anything. I'm crying a lot. My body wants to shut down, and so now we all have access to lots of parts of the nervous system. And sometimes people have the first one, the rise, hyper arousal, and then they days later have hypo. So it's not that we have one or the other, but oftentimes if you listen to your body, you do one more than the other.
Right.
And we really need to be in a conversation with our nervous system. We need to be in a relationship with it. Because even if you love motherhood, but you're not sleeping, well, there's still something to notice there.
Right.
That you may need more care and support around for more flourishing.
I can remember definitely the sense, and particularly, I would say it was probably the most heightened when I had my twins last. There's actually an episode, I'll ask Rebecca to link to it in the show notes, where I talk about this whole season of, what's the most stressful, going from one kid to two to three. And I'm like, listen, there was, even with the length of motherhood I had, nothing had prepared me for twins. And so when I'm with someone like you, Leslie, who twins were first, I'm like, bless your heart, because it kicked my hiney, the twins at the very end. And I already had a whole lot of mothering chops to that point. But I can remember particularly after the twins were born, and their next older siblings were still toddlers and they were babies. And I was also trying to prepare my oldest to go to college. And and I can remember saying the words, and I'm seeing it show up now in parlance surrounding motherhood a little bit more. But I would say to my husband, I am touched out. I mean, I would be so overstimulated just by the number of people who physically needed to touch me, or for whom I was serving physically. And I would hit the end of the day completely wired in my head. But I was like, if one more person touches me, I just know what I'm going to do. And the net effect of some of that was it became very difficult. I would find that I was okay with the demands made by the kids, by the family. But if there was a hiccup, say, with getting a car payment in and somebody on the phone was snippy with me about some mistake that had been made on a direct deposit or something, that's when I would go to pieces. Like I would be okay within the context of home. So I would have told you, no, the mothering's going great. But it was just the one more straw, from some outside influence. Do you find that can be true for women too, that the mothering can feel like it's going well, but that is as far as the capacity goes? Do you find that sometimes to be the case?
You just said the magic word. I think so much of motherhood is about capacity. And so just like you just said, either your capacity is spent on the children, and so marriage and or work and or friendships and or spiritual life feel like they're getting leftovers and crumbs and you have lots of emotions about that, or your capacity is really small for your mothering, and you're able to do other things, and then you have feelings about that. Right. So capacity is very much informed by your nervous system, your level of attunement to yourself, your level of receiving attunement from whether it's the Lord or friends or spouse or family. Support. Capacity seems to be such a key thing. And if we can notice our capacity without judging it, we have so much we can learn in terms of what do we do with that? How do we make decisions, right? Because how we treat trauma, sin, stress, and health issues are very different, but they can present the same. Right. So I think I'm all about slowing down and noticing your capacity so you can make decisions about it.
I think capacity is one of the places we are most at risk for comparison. And what I mean by that is I look at someone else who seems to be accomplishing, doing, And I then will often turn it inwardly and think, well, if I were more motivated, more organized, more on top of things, I miss it sometimes, Leslie, that God gives different people different measures of capacity.
That's right.
And yet, for some reason, I think capacity is a meritocracy instead of something that we get wired for. And of course, we can all learn greater endurance, greater patience, those things are always available to us. The Holy Spirit can help us with that. But there is just the reality. It's like when I watch the Tour de France, and there are these humans who are...
Are they humans?
I don't know. They just have a pulse ox that they natively have been gifted that gives them an oxygen exchange rate that is just beyond your average human. And hopefully now in the Tour de France, that isn't being chemically enhanced. But anyway, but still, even back when it was being chemically enhanced, you're still looking at an anomaly, if you will, within the human race of people who have that kind of oxygen exchange capacity. I'm starting to try to get kinder with myself about realizing that other people can have different levels of capacity. But here's a question for you. How do we know when we might need to kick it into a higher gear, that maybe we're getting a little mired in some of our own stuff? And then where is the place where we need to extend greater kindness to ourselves and go, this is the capacity I have, and that's the capacity someone else has? This has always been tricky ground for me, Leslie, because I sometimes left to my own, honestly, I would just want to hole up in my room and just watch Netflix for days. The introvert in me is like, I'm done with you people. And yet part of being a grown up is getting up and doing stuff sometimes when it doesn't always feel the best. But the flip side of that is when we run ourselves into the ground. How do you help women understand when to push and when to pause?
Well, I don't think you can do any of that if you aren't connected to your body. If you don't take the time to learn your own signals, and I mean signals of when you're in stress, signals of when you're in sin, signals of when you're mad, signals of when capacity is shortening. I don't know how else we will find choices. Because my experience of life is that if I'm not slowing down and registering my own senses, like my own signals, life just starts happening to me. And that can mean days of Netflix, or it can mean overworking and workaholism. So when life is happening to me and I'm just kind of serving whatever's in front of me, sort of unaware, I'm more at risk for hurting myself, or others,
Right.
honestly, like either by avoiding things I should be looking at, or looking too much at something, or looking at nothing. I mean, so I don't know how, like, I don't know how in our culture's pace and in our expectations of women, any of us are going to survive intact if we aren't kind of connected to our body. This temple, right? We're all taught as little kids, your body's this temple. And usually that meant, so don't do, don't do, don't do. I think of it, this is our temple. So get real into it, get real connected with it, cherish it, understand it. It's not just a shell holding you up. It really is showing you what's going on.
Right. Right. And I think there has been, at least for me, being raised in the church and the messaging we get as women in faith circles, there's this phrase that we're hearing used. It's been around for a while, but I'm hearing it more and more. And this is this phenomenon of feeling disembodied from your own body, that
Yes.
somehow there's some kind of spiritual, you know, superiority if you can disconnect from how your body's feeling. And I've had to even reflect
Mm,
on, for example, some of my childbirth experiences when I would be
mm.
communicating directly to someone, this is what's happening. And I would be told, no, 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 no. All the way to delivering my own baby in the hospital, by the way, just as a moniker on that. But it is interesting to me in a lot of spiritual circles that we spend a lot of time, particularly for women, getting us somewhat disconnected from our physical bodies. But to your point, this is the vessel in which God chose to seat the soul and to breathe his
Mhm.
breath. And so
Mm,
why we ignore the signals we're being given, why we
mhm.
ignore the sense of a flush coming up on our neck when someone's speaking to us in a certain way, or when we
Right,
feel touched out, and why we somehow think that we're supposed to ignore that signal or push it away instead of
right.
welcoming it as information about what's
That's
going
right.
on. I think that we've got a lot of work to do on that in our faith circles to,
Yeah.
yes, of course, be disciplined in our bodies and to
Mhm,
recognize that we commit sins through our bodies at times, but to
mhm.
also cherish and appreciate what we're being given in that way.
Oh, and I think, for me as someone who can be anxious, I may still decide, hey, this emotion, you know what? I don't think you're serving me today. I don't think you're here for a good reason. I am going to ask you to leave. Just because we're going to register our signals, it doesn't mean that sometimes we don't still then need to choose. You are not here to help me. You are
Right,
not here to serve me, but I'm glad I noticed you. I see you. Thank you for telling me something, but what you're telling me isn't helpful today. I'm actually
right,
not going to worry about that. I'm going to lay it down. So instead of just instinctually avoiding and numbing and pushing down, we get to make a choice with the emotion. If we can kind of, get to know it, greet it, and be like, you know what, I don't think for me today, what you're pointing out is not serving me. And I
right,
can choose that. I can choose to ignore it in a way or not
right,
let it have power. And then there are other things that I'm like, oh, you're really nagging at me. I really need to give you some attention. Okay, you're telling me I'm sad. I think you're right. Okay. So
right.
sometimes I may choose, I do need to lean into that and find a time to register that.
Absolutely. Through the course of the pandemic, I think there was also a spotlight that went on women because now everybody's in this season was trying to work from home and educate kids from home and all those things. And one of the things that began to pop up in a lot of the vernacular that I had a revelation myself and then was so glad that this began to be discussed was the mental load that many
Mm,
women today, particularly here in the US, carry when it comes to not only doing whatever their professional job is,
right.
but also all the other things that go with running a house, having kids, keeping them educated, keeping them clothed, just the constant to-do list that runs in many women's brains
Yes.
all the time. And I wonder sometimes, Leslie, if that experience coupled with things like feeling disembodied, not having vocabulary and tools to understand the emotions and the effects of those emotions that we're feeling. On top of this mental load that women are carrying today, I think it's something like 85% of women, 85 to 90%, are still doing the bulk of childcare, home management, all the things, while also working full time.
Wow.
If you look at all of that, do you feel like you're encountering women who are saying, wow, I'm not loving motherhood. This season of motherhood is so hard. But is it truly natively that? Or is it the phenomenon? Is it the ecosystem that we have around women today? How do you discern that when you have clients coming to you going, hey, I've heard you talk about it's okay to not like motherhood. I'm there. But it feels like there could be a lot of layers and complexions on this as we really look at some of the factors that make up that experience.
Yeah, I think it's a complicated question, honestly, because I think typically we all need validation in the places that we are struggling. But and I think, validation is a gift to normalize the pain we're in, right? We don't want to feel like we're crazy,
Right.
and so validation is really helpful. But sometimes the culture is so loud around something that it invites a label that ends up actually doing us a disservice. It actually puts us in such a victim corner that we're carrying a heavier load instead of validation is meant to bring a lighter load. It's meant to be like, okay, so you are carrying this. Okay, that's really hard. Are there some things we can do with it, right? I'm always trying to help moms with what can you let go of? Meaning, literally, you have to say, it's okay if the dishes look like that for 2.5 days. It's okay. If it'll help me get some sleep and not keep me spinning, that's okay. What can you say to your spouse if you are married? This is something I need you to do. And if it doesn't happen, then it doesn't happen. Then Johnny doesn't get to do baseball because I'm putting it on your column,
Right.
and I'm going to also give up rights to the outcome because I really need that kind of help. It's on you. And if it doesn't happen, it doesn't happen. And I'm going to regulate through that. So what can you let go of? What can you get help with? Is it time to get a HelloFresh meal once or twice? What do you need this month? Do you need a house cleaner once? What can you get help with? And what can you do with less resentment? Is there anything that would help you enjoy this task a little bit more so that we're not building this narrative of resentment? And what can you be proud of that you're great at? You are great at running the kids' schedules. You are great at making sure they're clothed. Are you able to take pride in any of it? So to me, the culture can speak so loudly and labely into things that sometimes it then truncates even the joy we might take in clothing our kids or cooking. However, we do need the validation around struggle so that we're lighter and can make some decisions in it that maybe do matter to your stress and do matter to your mental load. Is that answering your question?
Yes. And I think it's huge. I want to restate it because I really want the listener to get it, that it is important to acknowledge the challenges that women have today. I think that's very important. But to just stop there at that stop on the train station is not going to do us any good. That's just a centrifuge of exhaustion and not getting any further. So I love that you marry, yes, validation for the challenges that women face today and the empowering tools of saying, ask for help, decide what the standard's going to be, and then just cut it there. And you said something really important I want to focus on. It's so important for me to hear it, is disconnecting or getting myself out of the middle of the results of something that I do ask someone else to take on. That is so huge. For me, that's one of the toughest ones because I don't want to be responsible for it anymore, but I feel responsible for it. And I do sometimes feel like I'm going to be judged for the result of it. Yes. I even laugh. We've always had our kids help with the yard work and we turn it over to them at a certain point. And there are times that I'm sure the HOA drives by and thinks, what happened? But you know
We're
what,
not sure
Leslie?
what to find.
I
Yeah,
don't want to be out there on the reg now dealing with
right.
the shrubbery. And
Especially in
so I have to
105-degree
detach
heat.
myself. Yeah, I have to detach myself from some of the results. So that
Right.
is such a great practicum in terms of helping us both acknowledge and move forward from that. Now, help me in this way. Let's say that I'm in a small group and all I've ever wanted is to be a mom, and I'm getting to do it. And my husband and I have made adjustments so that I can focus primarily on that. And then there's
Hmm.
another mom sitting in my group, and she just doesn't seem to get it. And bless her heart. And doesn't she know that scripture says that, women are supposed to take care of their families, and this is supposed to be this high calling, and on and on. What do we do in that scenario? How do we
Mm-hmm.
love each other well and help each other well without allowing some of that messaging, attitude, judgment to creep
Mm-hmm.
in? How do we love each other
Hmm.
well, however we're experiencing our seasons of motherhood?
I mean, I go back to a little bit of the range that I'm always looking for and listening to is survival to flourish, right? So survival at the low end, right? I'm just getting through, and flourishing. I'm enjoying my life, my calling. I'm seeing the fruit of who I am in some ways in my life, right? That's more flourishing. So I meet women every day who are flourishing somewhere different. Some are flourishing more at home, and some are flourishing more with a work and home balance. And I just am looking for flourishing. And so, what I want for my friends, I have friends that are at home, I have friends that are at work. What I want for them is that they both experience some flourishing, however that goes. And I don't feel like it's my job to know what makes them flourish or not, or to judge what makes them flourish or not. But I'm here for it. I'm here for how's it going? How can you flourish more if you are, say, at home and it feels like you're experiencing a lot of the heaviness of mundane? And is anything important? Is anything sacred? Am I having any impact that feels embodied? And I have friends who are struggling and juggling the work life balance. And I'm like, okay, for you, what does flourishing look like? How do you feel it at home? How do you feel it at work? And let's be honest, everybody's a full time mom. That is
Right.
never off your mind, ever. But some women flourish when more is being juggled and some don't. And I think that goes back to capacity. And you talked about this earlier. They're kind of being this very personal, very unique level of capacity for things. And I just, other than the author and creator of our bodies and personalities, I do not feel like I know how to judge a person's capacity. Right. And
Right.
so I'm
Right.
here to just be a part of what helps you flourish. And honestly, I come across women who maybe they should consider working, and I come across women, Julie, where I'm like, maybe you should consider quitting.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Yeah.
because flourishing may be very stunted in whatever they're doing or not doing. So I hear it from all the sides. There are many women who I have said, please consider working less. And there are women I have said, please consider using your calling in some application.
Right. Right. I think that giving room for all of us to be able to express the kind of moms and women that God created us to be, and to get it off the track of thinking it has to look like the other women in our mom small group, or the other women
Right.
in our office, or the other women in our play group, to really give each other the room to flourish, I think is such a
Mm,
beautiful word. Leslie, thank you so much.
mm.
Leslie Bley, you're just the best. Where can listeners find out more about you and connect with you, particularly those in the Austin area? If they're like, you know what, I think I might need to go talk to Leslie. Where can they find you?
Yeah, locally, if you're looking for therapy and you're in Texas, I am just at leslieblycounseling.com. And if you're outside of the state and you're someone who's interested in personality and life coaching, I'm an Enneagram consultant, meaning I'm just sort of coaching from the sidelines of personality. And that's enneagramconsultant.com. And that's for anybody because it's not under the same licensure parameters as my therapy.
Right, right. All right. I'll ask Rebecca to get that in the show notes. Be sure and check out those show notes where you can see highlights and links to a lot of the things that we've talked about today. And also, if this episode has helped you, I would love for you to share it with a couple of your friends, because one of the greatest thank yous you can give us to our team for the podcast is to share the things that have helped you and impacted you. Leslie, again, you're just the best. I'm so glad that you reached out 6 years ago and said, hey, I need some friends, because I count myself very fortunate to have you as a friend. Love you much, and thanks again.
Thank you.